Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of California Botanical Garden. I'm Christy Manu. I'm the Education Director here at the Garden. And today we are bringing you a California native plant preview program. I'm joined today by two of our lead volunteer propagators of California native plants, Christina Campbell and Sal Levinson, who are joining me actually from one of the garden's propagation areas here on site. This presentation is part of a special partnership between the garden and the City of Berkeley Public Works and their Adopt a Spot Traffic Circle volunteer program. Together, we received a grant from the UC Berkeley Chancellor's Community Partnership Fund to support the planting of appropriate California native pollinator-friendly plants in our Berkeley traffic circles. So today, Christina and Sal will talk about a collection of plants that will be made available in September for the Adopt a Spot Traffic Circle volunteers and to the public. And they'll be sharing some general information about their growing requirements and some of their pollinator relationships. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Christina. Thank you so much.
Hi, happy to be part of this program. I'm just going to talk in general about California natives, and then we'll focus on the specific plants that we've selected to be part of this traffic circle project. So just a little background, there are many different microclimates in California. So not all natives are drought tolerant. People always talk about, oh, California natives drought tolerant. Not all of them are drought tolerant. The ones that have been selected for the traffic circles are drought tolerant. They were selected for that reason, for easy care, and for habitat value. But just speaking in general about drought tolerance, there's some microclimates in California that are very different from the one that we have here at Berkeley. And for example, many natives here on the coast thrive in full sun, but if you take them over the hill to Contra Costa County where it's a lot hotter, they need shade, partial shade. And some natives actually want more shade, but as I said, we're going to focus on the plants that have been selected by the City of Berkeley and that we have available for this traffic circle project. So drought tolerance, what does that mean? When a plant goes into the ground, it's not drought tolerant immediately. It doesn't mean you can plant it and then walk away and say, oh, well, the rain will come and it'll be okay. The reason that plants are drought tolerant is that they develop quite deep root systems. So a typical plant would need at least a year's growth in order to develop the kinds of deep roots they need to become truly drought tolerant. So the first year, we'd suggest that you water at least twice a week to get them established, unless, of course, it's raining. Most natives do look better if they have some occasional deep water during the dry summer months. So better a thorough watering several times than just going out and giving them a sprinkle. So one way to test this is dig down into the soil when you've watered. Just see how far down the water has actually penetrated, because you want the plant to actually be sending roots down and not just kind of sipping on the surface. That doesn't really work. The frequency of watering during the first year and subsequent life of the plant really depends on lots of different things. There's the soil type, there's the exposure, there's the angle of the soil where the plant is planted, and also the season. So soil types in general, natives want good drainage. As I mentioned before, they want to be able to develop deep roots. They don't want to have their roots sitting in the soggy water. They want to be reaching for the water down below. And if they sit in soggy soil, it's possible that they would develop fungi in the soil, which we do not want. So the soil in Berkeley is often clay, as most of us home gardeners have figured out. So often it's helpful to do some soil amendments, for example, crushed lava or crushed pumice, which can lighten the soil so that the water will drain better. On the other side, some soil amendments can help the soil retain some water. So we have a balance there. Exposure. So exposure is, think about the planting area where you are, where is it getting the most sun and how much heat is does that mean for the plants? Is there wind as a factor? Wind can really dry plants out. Angle. So plants that are on a slope, for example, on a berm or on a hillside, really do well with the natives do well because they love that good drainage that's facilitated by gravity. We love gravity. So that's certainly a consideration. And then season in terms of watering, what are the daytime temperatures? Is there any rainfall? Those are all factors in considering how often you need to water. So get to know your plants when you're planting in the garden and group them by their watering needs. There's some natives that actually don't want any summer water at all. So you really need to know what your plants are expecting to get. In general, though, most plants do appreciate during the long summer months, say once a month, really deep water. It keeps them looking a lot better. When to water? Watering in the morning is the best. If you water in the evening, there's a chance that you encourage mildew, which we do not want. And if you water in the middle of the day, the hot time of the day, there's much more evaporation, so you're wasting water. Plus, there's a chance of leaf burn. So now my pal Sal, my fellow volunteer propagator, is going to talk to you about what you do when you actually get your plants and you're ready to put them in the soil. So you're on, Sal.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Hi, I'm Sal, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about planting. So the first thing about planting is I generally recommend finding a cool or overcast day. You're going to be disturbing the plant, so it will wilt, but if it's cool and overcast, it'll wilt less. So go out, dig a hole, and then you water your hole and you water the plant. Right here, I have a willow. This isn't part of the program. It gets to be a big tree and it needs water. So if you have a stream behind your house, this might be a good choice, especially if you like swallowtails, because there is a swallowtail that will lay its eggs on the leaves of this plant. So after you've watered your plant, you knock the plant out of the pot and then look at your roots. So usually, Christina's gonna gather the dirty soil. So usually you just loosen the soil a little bit with your fingers. If that doesn't loosen it up, then you take an awl. Can you see this? This is an awl or a ice pick or a nail, and then loosen it up with that. So get the roots loosened up before you put it in the ground. This will take 5 minutes, so I'm just giving you an idea of what that's.
Depending on how root bound it is.
Depending, some of them just don't need it at all, and you can just plant it. But this one has been sitting in a pot for a long time, so it's root bound. Thank you, Christina. So after you have the roots loosened up, you can put it in the ground and make sure you keep the level the same. So the soil level should be right the same as it was. You don't want to pile the soil up around the stem of the plant, and you also don't want the soil level too low so that the soil of the plant, like of the pot, like sticks out. So keep the soil level the same as much as possible. And then after you plant it, you can fertilize it. I like to use something balanced like 5-5-5 or 10-10-10. That way, both the leaves and the flowers and the fruits, all of it gets some fertilizer. So just a tablespoon or two is usually enough for the natives, and you'll probably never fertilize again. Then you muddy it in, which means essentially you water it. You don't want air around the roots, so you water it to settle all the soil around the roots. Then it's a good idea to try to shade your plants. These are going to go into traffic circles. Usually it's full sun, and that's kind of hard on a plant that's just been transplanted. Sometimes around Berkeley, you'll see free chairs, broken chairs. That's perfect for like shading a plant, or a table, or you can also use a tomato cage and tie some cloth around it so it's shaded, but the shade will really help it during those first few days. And then after a few days, then you can take the cloth off and it'll probably be fine in the full sun. So that's it for planting. I hope it goes well. Okay, Christina?
Okay, so now we're going to actually talk about specific plants that have been selected for this traffic circle project. And I will talk about the general characteristics of the plant, and Sal will talk about the pollinators and why they're good for the habits. So the city of Berkeley has an official list of plants that they suggest for the traffic circles that we are working from. They're generally drought tolerant once established. So remember, you have to establish the drought tolerance. They're not just going to be drought tolerant the minute you put them in the ground. And they generally look better with occasional deep water during the hot months if there's no rain. They're all good for butterfly and bird gardens, valuable sources of pollen and nectar for native bees and birds, and serve as host plants. And Sal will talk more in detail about that. So we'll introduce you to the plants. First of all, we have Erigeron glaucus, cultivar Wayne Roderick. So here's the plant. Has deep purple flowers. It's also known as seaside daisy, and it's a very tough plant. I was just over at Tunnel Tops Park last week, and there's this whole hillside that's covered with this particular plant. They look great. But in nature, you'll find them along the California coast. You'll see them, I've seen them at Maury Point, along San Mateo coast, Sonoma coast. So they are spreading. No, excuse me. Yeah, they're spreading with the flowers held on little stems. They're fairly compact and neat. So the prolific blooming of these lovely purple flowers again, calm down, purple flowers, begins in spring and continue until autumn, especially if you clip the flowers, and that promotes, future growth. This particular cultivar, Wayne Roderick, has the darkest flowers of the Erigeron glaucus, the seaside daisy varieties. In terms of soil, it actually is one of the plants that tolerates clay. It would not mind having good drainage, but it actually can do okay in clay. And it's very easy and tough. It's named for Wayne Roderick, who's a California plantsman, whom some of you may have heard of. And because it's fairly deer resistant, the foliage is not particularly attractive to deer. So Sal, you're on.
Okay. Okay, so Erigeron glaucus is a nectar plant for the bees and butterflies, mainly because it has flowers. Just like any other garden plant, the flowers will attract bees and butterflies for nectar. Otherwise, there's nothing special about this plant in regards to wildlife or pollinators. Okay, Christina.
Okay, so next we have Achillea millefolium, also known as yarrow. That's the common name, or western yarrow. And it gets 1 to 3 feet high, with the flowers are on stems, and it spreads by rhizomes, so it can really colonize an area. If you cut back the flower stems, you can extend the flowering, and also improves the appearance. And the cut flowers actually work well. You can use them, enjoy them. The flowers are usually white to pinkish. We have 2 varieties that we're offering, one that has white flowers and one that has a sort of pale salmon pink, they call it. So the people who are coming to find traffic circle plants will find a choice there. So the flowers are usually late spring into summer. It generally tolerates most soils. Again, it's not a terribly fussy plant, but as usual, it likes good drainage. So it's very undemanding. The leaves actually have been used, the oil from the leaves is used for medicinal purposes. And speaking of the leaves, you see how feathery, what am I doing here? How feathery the leaves are. When you first plant them, the feathery leaves will wilt easily. So you'll want to give them a sprinkle the first few weeks just to keep that foliage looking as pretty as it is.
So this one only has a flower bud. You can't really see the flowers on this, but it develops a flat-topped flower which is really good for a landing platform for the butterflies and the bees. So that is good nectar plant. I would also like to mention that the as Christina mentioned, the foliage is medicinal, but the birds like it as well. We think of birds as eating insects and seeds and fruits and so on, but sometimes they eat foliage too, and this is one of the plants they like.
Okay, so next we have Eriogonum grande var rubescens. So Eriogonum, and we have two different ones to show you, but let me talk about it a little bit at first. Eriogonum, also known as buckwheat, and this is not about making pancakes, but buckwheat is one of the largest groups of plants in California. There's some that are just teeny tiny that grow on the alpine fell fields. The largest one, Eriogonum giganteum, is from the Channel Islands, and it gets quite huge and has huge, beautiful flower heads that it's called St. Catherine's lace. This particular one, Eriogonum grande rubescens, is also from the Channel Islands, and we've got two to show you. They have the foliage and the flower color can vary. The color of the foliage and the color of the flowers can vary quite a lot. As you see, we've got some pale pink, we got some hotter pink. The plant stays quite neat. It's a sort of a low mounding form, and then it holds the flowers up on the stalks, as you can see. It's on the stalks. It tolerates most soils, but prefers to have good drainage, and it's very hardy. And I think that's all I have to say right now.
Okay, so again, we have one of these flat-topped flowers, makes a nice landing platform for the butterflies for nectaring. But really the interesting part about this plant, as far as wildlife is concerned, are the leaves. So some plants are host plants, which means that the female butterflies will lay eggs in the leaves, and then the caterpillars will eat the leaves. Usually when we think about butterflies, we think about butterflies and flowers together, and that's so lovely. But the important part is the leaves, because generally people plant flowers. They can find enough nectar, but finding the host plant can be much more difficult. So planting the host plant, such as this one for the hair streaks, or like a willow for the swallowtails, that's the really important part of butterfly gardening. So let's see if there's anything else on my list that I want to mention. Oh, and then hair streaks, that's a small butterfly with a tail on it. It's usually like less than an inch, and called a hair streak because the tail is so small, like a hair on the hind wings.
Okay, next we have this dazzling plant. This is Epilobium canum var latifolium, Everett's choice. So Epilobium family, people often refer to them as California fuchsia. They are not fuchsias. They just have these tubular flowers that look like they're fuchsia looking flowers. And Epilobiums used to be called Zauschneria. So if you see Zauschneria, it's really Epilobium now. So the powers that be at Jepson Herbarium, who decide what a name is, have designated Zauschneria are now Epilobium. So this particular one, Everett's choice, it's particularly great for the traffic circles because it's very low growing, it spreads, it's got vigorous, it's a subshrub, and it's got fuzzy, you can't tell, but it's got fuzzy leaves. And so the fuzzy leaves are not delicious to the deer, they avoid it. And it tolerates most soils, although as usual, it would like to have good drainage. So the flowers, these vivid orange-red flowers, appear from summer into fall, and often they may be the only thing flowering in a garden. So when things have kind of died down in the summertime, here we have these beautiful, brilliant colored flowers in the fall to light up a space. Pruning at the end of the season, it's good to prune the plants way back to within a few inches, and that will promote new growth from the crown in the spring of the next year for the following year. It does reseed, so the flowers can spread seeds. And as I mentioned, the fuzzy leaves are resistant to deer. So who is Everett? So I had to do a little digging to find out. Everett is Everett Butts, who's from the Pumney Nursery in the town of Lincoln, which is northeast of Sacramento. So he was the one who identified this particular cultivar and then had it introduced by Cornflower Farms. Okay, that's it on the Epilobium.
Okay, so the Epilobium.
One more thing, sorry.
Go ahead.
I meant to say it will get 4 to 5 feet wide. So it stays really low, 6 inches, but it could get 4 to 5 feet wide. Just a heads up.
So the Epilobium, or Sautionaria as I like to call it, has these long tubular flowers, and it's perfect for hummingbirds. So you will often see hummingbirds coming to these flowers for nectar, especially since there's not that much blooming in late summer, early fall. But in addition to that, the bees will use it. Even though they cannot actually get down into this flower the normal way, they will bite a hole into the bottom of the tube and steal the nectar. So they're not involved in pollination, it's nectar robbing. So both the bees and hummingbirds will use this plant.
All right. So next we have a plant which is not looking at its finest right now. It's kind of the end of the season, but we're talking about the California poppy, the state flower of California, Eschscholzia californica. The plants itself are looking pretty scraggly right now. They're just starting to develop, I don't know if you can see, some new growth. But, so this is a plant that it will get 8 to 24 inches high and about 2 feet wide. It's in some climates, it's considered an annual. In our climate, it is a perennial, and it does reseed profusely. So this particular plant has, so I saved this one because it has, can you see, this is the seed pod, which is what's left when the flower is done. And so the seed pod will, well, I'm trying to keep this still, the seed pod will burst open and fling its seeds far and wide. So you will see it show up in lots of different places that may surprise you. The flowers are pretty much March through August. And if you cut the scraggly plants near the ground level in autumn is a good idea for promoting the growth for the next year. Plus, if you cut back the plants, the flowering plants, you might get a second bloom of flowers. So did I talk about the soil? It tolerates most, as usual, the old line, tolerates most soil, however, prefers good drainage.
Okay, so these get much happier once they're in the ground. They really don't like growing in pots because the soil is too hot. So I wanted to show you this flower. The pollen in this flower is orange. Most flowers have yellow pollen. There are certainly a whole range of colors, but most of it is orange, is yellow, and this one is orange. So the bees use this plant not for nectar because the poppies have no nectar. They use it for the pollen. And if you watch, you can actually see their pollen baskets. They have pollen baskets on their hind legs, and they will develop little lumps of orange on their hind legs. And that can be kind of fun to see. If bees are foraging at other plants, you'll often see little lumps of yellow. But on this plant, if they're this plant, it'll be orange because the pollen is orange. In addition to that, I should mention that this is one of the few plants, it doesn't like its roots disturbed. So when you take it out of the pot, don't mess with the roots, just plop it in the ground, and then it will recover more quickly.
Okay. Next we have one of my faves. This is Arctostaphylos, also known as manzanita. So when the Spaniards came to California, there was Arctostaphylos all over the state, and they saw that there were little red berries on them, and they said, "Oh, manzanita." If you speak Spanish, you know it means little apple. So they were not little apples, but this particular, so Arctostaphylos is the genus. There are many, many varieties all over California that take many shapes and sizes. This particular one is perfect for the traffic circle because it's very low growing. It only will get to about 14 inches tall, and it will spread to about 5 feet. These lovely branches spread out. It's got very pretty foliage, little round leaves, as you can see. This particular one has pale pink flowers that come in the winter into spring. So this plant in this pot is quite confused. I don't know why it's sending out flowers at the end of the summer, but as Sally mentioned, sometimes pot culture is hard on plants. They don't quite know what they're doing. So the berries that are produced after the flowers are done are edible, but they're not particularly tasty. Birds like them. And I think the Native Americans would use the berries to make some kind of medicinal tea. Again, the soil, it's pretty tolerant about different soils, but as always would prefer good drainage. And this particular cultivar is a cross between Arctostaphylos numularia and Arctostaphylos uva ursi. Uva ursi means grapes for the bears. So there are many uva ursis up in the mountains. You'll see a lot of low-growing manzanitas that are in that uva ursi category because the bears love those berries. So it's good to prune out any dead growth to keep it looking good.
So as Christina mentioned, this plant is good for wildlife because the birds will eat the berries, the bears will eat the berries. But in addition to that, it generally flowers kind of in the winter. It's sort of like our spring in January and February. So there's not a whole lot in bloom then. So it's good for the bees who are active at that time of year. It's also host plant for the brown elfin and the Ceanothus silk moth. So those are two, one's a butterfly, one's a moth, Lepidoptera, and that occur in our area, but not generally in Flatlands, Berkeley. But maybe if enough people plant this manzanitas, then it could change and we might have those insects in Flatlands, Berkeley. Okay, your turn, Christina.
Okay, so the last of the traffic circle plants is a grass. It's a tufting form. This is called Festuca Siskiyou Blue. You can see the lovely blue color. It's a it stays quite tidy. It's this nice tufted mound. It does send up flower stalks, and you can mow those off to keep it tidy. It can survive with absolutely no care at all. You can just sort of leave it alone if you don't want to deal with tidying it up. It likes well-drained soil. Surprise, surprise. So it gets about 1 foot high and about 1 to 2 feet wide as it develops. And it's very striking actually in a mass planting. So if you see a lot of them together, it's quite elegant, and it's very easy to grow, and it's deer resistant.
I agree with Christina about the mass planting, and I would say, especially with this plant, but with a lot of plants in general, planting 2 or 3 is much better than planting just one. It's easier for the butterflies to find it if there's more than one plant. So Festucas is a plant that the skipper butterflies will lay eggs on. I'm sure you've all seen the skippers. They're the little brownish, amberish butterflies. Oftentimes they'll be in the grass because they lay eggs in the grass, not just Festuca, but they love a very common weed in our area, Eryharta. They'll also use crabgrass, but Festuca is the native that they would use. So this is host plant for skipper butterflies, and I especially recommend it for that reason.
So that's the end of the show about the plants that are specifically selected for traffic circles, but I think we're being allowed a little extra time to talk about some of our other California native favorites that aren't necessarily appropriate for traffic circles. So one of them is one of the few California native succulents, and this is a Dudleya. Lovely Dudleya. They form There's small, sort of charming rosettes. They're very long-lived. They really don't want to be watered very frequently. And if you water them, they don't want to be watered on the crown. You need to water around the base because they just don't like having their leaves wet. They do flower on stalks in May and July. They like good drainage. They don't like soggy roots. Their roots are not very deep. So they're undemanding in terms of water, and they tend to grow more in the fall. I don't know if there's something else to say about Dudleyas.
Oh yes, I did want to mention the Dudleyas. So again, this is a host plant. And in this case, the butterfly is a Sonoran blue that lays its eggs in the Dudleya. But in our area, you're very unlikely to see a Sonoran blue. They occur more in the San Jose area. But again, that's if enough people plant Dudleya, that's something that could change. We could get Sonoran blues in our area. So yeah, if you like succulents, this is a great one.
So another lovely California native is coffeeberry. Used to be called rhamnus, and it's now called Frangula. I think that's how it's pronounced. So this particular coffeeberry, there are many different species that have different sizes. This one is the cultivar called Eve Case. Eve stays quite tidy. It only gets about, 4 to 8 feet high and about 5 feet wide, and it's fairly fast growing. So it's compact. It's sort of manageable. You can prune it, keep it tidy. It likes full sun on the coast, but it would like some part shade inland. And the flowers are insignificant. You can sort of see they're little tiny flowers. They're insignificant in terms of human perspective, but actually they're important for some creatures who like the flowers. But they turn into these beautiful decorative berries, and then as later in the season, the berries will actually turn quite dark, hence the name coffeeberry, that they look like coffee berries. They tolerate most soils. They tolerate pruning, and they're evergreen, so they make a really nice shrub in your garden.
So again, this is another host plant. Pale swallowtails and Ceanothus silk moths will lay eggs on it. Also the gray hair streak. So I don't see a whole lot of pale swallowtails in Flatlands, Berkeley, but I have had one in my backyard at least once. I live in Flatlands, Berkeley. So really recommend it for that reason, but not for the traffic circles too high.
Yeah, so here's another plant that's not for traffic circles, but is quite a lovely plant. This is called Lonicera involucrata. Its common name is twinberry honeysuckle. So it's in the honeysuckle family. And the reason it's called twinberry is, first of all, there are these lovely little double flowers, which mature and turn into little double berries. So it's quite a handsome plant. It is deciduous, however, so it's not one that you're going to use to create a screen, but it is it's very handsome as it grows in the garden, and it's very shiny foliage. It's beautiful foliage. It's the flowers come out in March to July, and then they turn into these blackish berries that are edible but not particularly tasty. It prefers good drainage as usual, and it's drought tolerant once established, but as usual, same thing, long summer months, it would like, an occasional, say once a month, really good deep water. And it's good for erosion control. It grows really, really nice roots, and it's valuable nectar source for birds and butterflies. And Sal can say something maybe more specific than that.
Well, no, I don't really know that much more about it, but I do want to mention possible host plant for variable checker spot, another butterfly. So yeah, I always recommend the host plants.
So that concludes our presentation. We hope that we've been helpful in helping you understand how to be successful growing California native plants, and particularly the plants that are being designated for the Traffic Circle project. But we love our California native plants, don't we?
We do love the natives.
Yeah. So we'll say farewell and hope to see you in the garden.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Sal and Christina. That was amazing. So much information there. So check your email inboxes soon for those dates on our Adopt a Circle program pickup day and our California native plant sales, both in September. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you at the UC Botanical Garden.